Hello and good afternoon, CTS266 Section 840 students for the Spring 2016 semester at Anne Arundel Community College. This is the Cisco Networking Academy CCNP Switch course where we're focusing on Layer 2, and this video tutorial we actually had to break it up. This is going to be Part 2 of Lab 3-1. So in Part 1, if you're interested in the Part 1 of the video, which runs up to which runs up to Part 3. That's where we stopped. We talked about VTP version 1 and 2, VLANs and trunks. Now this, Part 2 of the lab, which I should say this is actually Part 3 of the lab, but Part 2 in the video tutorial series. This second part is going to be about Part 3, where we're going to be taking a look at VTP version 3 and VLANs and trunking. And so to start our conversation out, excuse me, this was the topology that that we were initially working with here. And so if I were to go ahead and pull out the drawing tools, so we had VTP version 2 set up and configured to run between ALS W01 and DLS W01. So now what we're going to do, and actually this is the older drawing. Let me go ahead and squeegee this and let's drop this down. There we go. And what we're going to do now is we're going to be interested in setting up VTP version 3 between Dl So1, O2, and ALS O2. And again, we have the VTP version 2 set up in here. Now, remember, VTP version 2 and 1, those are not backward compatible with each other. There is backward compatibility between VTP version 3 and 2. However, you should be running the same VTP version throughout your environment. It is not a good idea to mix the VTP versions. And so let's talk about and we'll demonstrate some of the differences between VTP version 3 and VTP version 2 as we make our way through the rest of this lab. So we're going to go ahead, and right now it says the first step, we're going to be setting VTP version 3 on DLS So1. So here we are on the distribution layer switch 01, and let's go into global config from privilege exec, and we're going to say VTP version, and if I do a question mark, you can see we've got 3 choices, 1, 2, or 3. So I'm going to say VTP version 3. Now we're presented, and it's the lab guide actually shows you this exact message. It says old version 2 VLAN configuration detected and read OK. And so now we're going to go ahead and convert that to version 3 files will be written in the future. So one of the first things that we want to talk about is VTP version 3 hides the password. So if we were to set a password, and we're going to do that here in a second, you'll see that you used to be able to show VTP password, and it shows me the password, right? It says VTP password Cisco123. So we're going to see as we move through the rest of these switches here that that's going to change. So I'm going to go ahead and type end, and we're going to save the configuration. So now let's jump over, or actually let's say show VTP status. Let's check and see what the status shows here. So as you can see, we support versions 1 through 3. I'm now running version 3, right? We have the same domain name. We are a VTP server, 12 existing VLANs, and the configuration revision number has been reset. So when we switched from version 2 to version 3, we had some changes that had taken place. In fact, if I come over here and let's take a look at ALS W01, if we go into privilege exec and I say show VTP status, you can see we were on configuration revision 9. But when I changed Dl So1 over to VTP version 3, it now shows 0. Now you'll also notice we pick up a couple of different, what I'll say, quote-unquote features here for multiple spanning tree, or the multiple spanning tree protocol, as well as feature unknown. And so a quick note on this, and you'll read about this in the text as well as the lab, is that VTP version 3 has been extended to support what are called opaque databases. Now, so what is it's sort of this esoteric term, right? What is an opaque database? Well, an opaque database is a database that is a database other than VTP, but that is being communicated via VTP. So in other words, VTP has been extended to not only support VTP messages, which obviously it needs to, but it's been extended to support other opaque databases such as multiple spanning tree. So you could have VTP assisting you with the synchronization of multiple spanning tree information as well as your VTP information. So let's jump on to, sorry about that, ALSW02, and we'll go into global config mode here. We'll say VTP domain SW lab, and then we're going to say VTP version 3, because we're going to use version 3 here on the switch, VTP mode server, and then VTP password Cisco123. All right, so you'll notice we keep seeing this message here, detected old version 2 VLAN configuration file, but now it's going to be version 3 going forward. And so that takes care of the other access layer switch, ALSW02. And so now we're going to configure trunking on DLSW02 and ALSW02. So let's go ahead and dive in. We'll start with DLSW02. So we'll go into global config, say interface range FA10, and actually this is going to be 607 to 12. And we're going to say switch port trunk. We'll set the native VLAN to 888. We're going to say switch port trunk encapsulation .1Q. So we're hard coding the encapsulation. Now we're going to hard code the mode. It's going to be on, right? It won't be auto or desirable. It's going to be on as soon as I hit enter here. And in fact, let's go ahead and pull this back real quick and say do show run interfaces FA607 switch port. And let me see, do show interfaces FA607 switch port. And you can see that negotiation of trunking is currently on. So when I say switch port mode trunk, let's take another look at that output. And actually we'll let this finish up here. So, I'm sorry, the operational mode was what we were looking at, what we should have been looking at earlier here. So the operational mode, you can see here, it was down and it was trunk. Well, now it is trunk and trunk, right? Because we've hard-coded the fact that this is going to be a switch port. Oh, I'm sorry, a trunk port. All right, so we've got the switch port mode trunk. Now let's turn off DTP. Switch port no negotiate. And then we're going to say switch port trunk allowed VLAN except 1 and 999. So all the other VLANs are going to be allowed except for 1 and 999. And let's save our config here. So we'll do a write memory. And let's do some verification. So show interfaces trunk is a great command to see what's going on. Now, you'll notice I don't have any VLANs in the spanning tree in the forwarding state, right? So, but again, we are in on mode, so it's not auto, it's not desirable, it's on. We did not negotiate this on this end. It's hard-coded, and our status is trunking. Our native VLAN is 8888. All right, so that takes care of DLSW02. If we say show VTP status, you can see that we haven't done any of the VTP configuration here yet, right? So the configuration revision number, which is the default of 0, right? Remember, the default is 0. There's been nothing done yet. So what are we going to do here on DLSW2? What is it that we should be doing? Well, we need to make sure that we set the VTP domain to SW lab. And then we're going to set the VTP version to 3, the VTP mode to client, or I'm sorry, it looks like this is DLSW2 is going to be a server, and that's what it is by default. So we're getting the mismatch commands there, and that's okay. So what about the VTP password should be Cisco123. So it says setting device VTP password to Cisco123. So now let's say do show VTP status, and we should see that we are version 3. SW Lab is our VTP domain name. Pruning and trap generation are both disabled. We have our device ID, which is the switch MAC address here. We're in server mode. We've got 5 existing VLANs. However, no extended VLANs, and the configuration revision is 0. And now you'll see the difference here at the bottom. We have the support for the opaque databases. In this instance, it's the multiple spanning tree. Now, a quick note is that VTP version 3 can send or support the extended range VLAN, so from 1006 to 4094. The only way to do that before, without VTP version 3, is to put the switch in transparent mode with version 1 and 2. So version 1 and 2, before you had version 3, that was the only way to put the switch in transparent mode to get it to support the extended range VLANs, because the VTP domain with version 1 and 2 did not support those extended range VLANs, but VTP version 3 does. Now, VTP version 3, we talked about the pruning feature here. Remember that VTP version 3 can only prune normal range VLANs, in other words 2 to 1001. So it can't prune the extended range VLAN. So something to keep in mind, and we're still receiving these messages here because we need to configure ALSWO2. That's who is kicking back these messages, that we've got a native VLAN mismatch. And, oh, that's right. Okay, put the domain in there. All right, so let's go ahead now and say do show VLAN brief. And let's see the VLANs that we have here. So we only have these 5 VLANs. We've got the default VLAN, and then we have 1002 through 1005. All right, so that takes care of our VTP setup, but yet again, the revision number is 0. So let's go back over here to DLSW01. Let's go into, and actually, we'll go into global config, and if I were to say VLAN 111, let's see what happens here, because what's going to happen right now is one of the biggest benefits if you're going to run VTP. This is one of the biggest benefits with using VTP version 3. So I type in VLAN 111, and what do we get? We get a message that says VTP VLAN configuration not allowed when device is not the primary server for the VLAN database. So remember with version 2, version 1 and version 2 of VTP, all I had to do was go into global config on the server and say VLAN whatever, and it would immediately create it, and then it would immediately flood that out in a subset advertisement to all of the other VTP speakers in my domain, and then everybody would update. So you should probably see the inherent risk in a architecture like that, where all you have to do is to go into global config and you can start pushing VLANs out. Well, with VTP version 3, this is a major benefit, and it's called the primary server, right? And they say server, but it's primary switch in reality, right? Because we're doing this on switches. And so this has been added to the setup, and you can only have a single primary switch in the VTP version 3 domain at a time. All right, so let's go ahead, and this is also interesting, is that you make the change gets made because it's a runtime state. So we're changing a runtime state here. So we do it from privilege exec. So I say VTP primary, and take a look here. So here is one of the features that are supported is multiple spanning tree. right? So I could become a VTP primary for the multiple spanning tree. But we're interested in the VLANs, right? So we're interested in the VLANs here. Now, there's a force option, and what that does is it causes the switch to simply skip the check to see if somebody else is the primary, and it seizes control as the primary server. But again, you probably want to avoid that. If somebody else has the VTP primary switch, you probably want to figure out what switch that is and what they're doing. So again, VTP primary for VLANs, because that's what we're dealing with here. So now, again, this is how we have to do it with version 3. We must become the primary server before we can make any changes to the VLAN topology. So as you can see, we get a message here. This system is becoming the primary server for feature VLAN. And so what it's doing right now is it's checking to see, is anybody else out there in the VTP domain with me? Is anybody else a VTP version 3 primary server right now? Because again, you can only have one. So no conflicting VTP v3 devices found. So do you want to continue? I certainly do. So I hit enter. Now we should get, and there we go. So we get a syslog message here. Switch, VLAN, VTP primary server change. So it says, whoops, so it shows the MAC address of the switch has become the primary server for the VLAN VTP configuration or feature. Now, on DLS2, excuse me, on DLS2, if I do a show VTP status to see what's going on, so show VTP status and include primary, it will show me who the primary switch is. And again, if we look at the larger show VTP status output, where do we see that information? There we go, the primary ID and primary description, so the name of the switch. So again, if you were to get a message back, and let's do this, if I were to say VTP primary VLAN. See, it says, because again, remember, we already have a primary. DLSW01 is my primary. But I'm going to go ahead and say on DLSW02, hey, I want to be the primary too. So let's see what happens. How does iOS handle this? Now, it says, no conflicting VTP3 devices found. Do you wish to continue? Which is interesting, right? Because DLSW1 is the primary. We just promoted it to the primary, and it's going to increment the revision number. If I were to say show VTP status, you can see here, what is my VTP operating mode? I am the primary server. And by doing that, the configuration revision went from 0 to 1. So again, every time I go in, it's going to increment. But the question is, over here, it says no conflicting VTP v3 devices found. So I'm going to hit confirm. And let's see what happens. So it says there's been a primary server change, and that this switch, 6680, has become the primary server. So now what do we have here? You can see what happened here. We picked it up. So if I say show VTP status, I'm simply a server. I'm not the primary server. So again, my expectation was here, and I'm a little caught off guard by this, my expectation was that on DLSW1, since we were the primary, that I should have remained the primary and that this should have reported that there was a conflict. Right here, when it said no conflicting VTP version 3 devices found, do you wish to continue? Well, that's not the case because the primary was over on switch 1. So let's go ahead, we'll quit here and, oops, sorry, didn't want to say exit. Show VTP status. So I'm the primary server, so let's do it again. Let's swing it this way and see what happens here. So we're going to say VTP primary VLANs. All right, so the system is becoming the primary server for feature VLAN. And let's see if it notices that somebody else is the primary. So nothing conflicting was found. There were no other VTP version 3 devices found. And oddly enough, show VTP status. Now this guy is simply back to being a server, right? He's not the primary server. He's just in server mode. So if I were to say show VLAN brief, did we pick up all the VLANs? So we did. You see that? And we picked these all up from Dl So1 when he was the primary server. And then we set all the settings on Dl So2. But again, I'm still a little confused as to why it didn't bail out on us there, and why it said that it was okay to move forward. And so again, we're just simply, I guess, taking away the privilege from Dl So1. I thought it would have let us know that somebody else was the primary, and not have flipped it over. All right, so here's what we're going to do now. So on ALSW02, let's go to that switch on the bottom there, and we are in global config mode here. So we're going to say do show VLAN brief, include active. So let's see what we have down here. We've got the default and the management, and that is it. So here's what we want to do on ALSW02 is we're going to set this to client mode. And let me make sure that ALSW02 is supposed to be in client mode for VTP here. And well, okay, they leave it in. Oh, sorry, they leave it in server mode. Okay, so we're going to simply say VTP domain SW Lab. So name was already set to SW Lab, VTP version 3. We're already at version 3, VTP mode server. All right, so we're good there. I think we may have done this already. Password Cisco 123. And at this point, we need to go ahead and set the trunk links up on ALSW02. So and hold on one second here. Let me see. I may have scrolled. I think I scrolled back too far. I apologize. I'm trying to keep up with the steps here. And configure the VTP primary VLAN. We did that. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into interface, interface range FA 107 to 12, and I am actually going to go ahead and copy show run int FA 107. We're going to grab this right here, and we're going to drop that into ALSW02. All right, switch port no negotiate, so there we go. So now the ports are going to go down, then they're going to come back up. And so I'm going to do a quick write mem to save my config off. Show VTP status. So you can see version 3, we've got the right, excuse me, we have the right domain. Again, and we are at configuration revision 1. And now remember, we're at 1 because that's what we were at on the other distribution layer switches. So show VTP status. And there you go, configuration revision 1. All right, so ALSW02 is a server, so I should be able to say VTP primary VLAN, and it says this system is becoming the primary server for feature VLAN. And it's going to do a quick consistency check. There we go, no conflicting devices, so I'll hit enter, and we have become the primary for VTP version 3. And you see that message comes across on both distribution layer switches there at the bottom. That this is now, ALSW02 is now, so if I said VLAN We'll just say 555, and I hit enter. So let's see if I can become VTP primary VLAN. Let's see if while we're in VLAN configuration mode as the primary server, if that might be the check it's looking for. Maybe it's an order of operations issue. No, it's definitely not an order of operations issue. In fact, that is pretty interesting that it flips over and changes immediately. So let's see what happens here when I say end. So I just came out of VLAN configuration mode. Did anybody else pick up VLAN 555? Or I'm sorry, show VLAN brief. Did 555 propagate out? It did not. And again, this is an early release of code, so it's possible that it's looking past the check for some reason, or just failing on the check, which I think is interesting. So step 5 is a pretty straightforward step where we're going to go to DLSWO2, which is a 48-port switch, and we're going to go into global config, and we're going to shut down all the unused interfaces again. So interface range, FA60, what would it be, 1 to 5, or actually 1 through 6? We didn't start until 7. So 1 through 6, comma, FA0/13 to 48, and then gig 60, I better get this right here, 6013 to 48, and then gig 601 to 2. All right, there we go. So we're going to say switch port mode access. We're going to make them access ports. We're going to say switch port no negotiate. We're going to turn off DTP. And then we're going to say switch port access VLAN 999. That's our parking lot VLAN. And then we're going to shut all of those ports down. All right, so we've saved that off there. So we've got all kinds of messages that are going to come up here. So now back on DLSW1, it says DLSW1 is able to create VLANs, including extended range VLANs. So note that because ALS1 is running VTP version 2 and its revision number is 6, it's going to ignore any of the VTP version 2 messages sent to it because they have a lower revision number. Because again, remember, our revision number right now is 1 on DLS01. So when a VTP message with an equal revision number but different MD5 checksums received, ALS1 is going to report an error. So here we added 7 VLANs and then removed 6 of them to push the revision number to 9. All right, so on DLSW1, so we're looking at interoperability between ALSW01 and DLSW01. So we're going to go ahead and go into global config here. Now let's see what happens when I say VLAN 510. So we've got VLAN 510. I'm not going to name these. We'll just simply say VLAN 511, VLAN 512, 513, 514, 5. Let's see, does it go to 15? Yep, to 15. And then it says VLAN 1500. And then, and that's it. And then it wants us to go ahead and exit out on DLSW01 and then say no VLAN 510 to 514. All right, so if we come over here to ALSW01, does ALSW01 show any of those VLANs? It does not. And it's not showing 515. And here's what's interesting. On DLSW1, it didn't tell us, because it's VTP version 3, it didn't tell us to go into primary, VTP primary VLAN. So the lab at step 6 doesn't actually tell you to do this. However, if we're not the primary, and let's see here, we still don't see any of those VLANs that were created there. Okay, so nothing conflicting found, so then we're going to go into global config, and let's do this again. We'll say VLAN 510, 511, 512, 513, 514, 515, and then it wanted us to create VLAN, is it 1500? Yeah, VLAN 1500, and then say no, or actually let's exit out here. So do show VLAN brief. So did it create them locally? It clearly creates them locally. Let's check DLSWO2. Does it see? So VTP version 3 is running. What about ALSWO2? Does it see them? Absolutely. So VTP version 3 is running here, and everything looks great. Now let's go ahead and say no VLAN 510 to 514. So do show VLAN brief, and they're gone with the exception of 515. So let's check here. Run show VLAN again. Everybody is gone except for 515, and the extended range is 1500. Now remember, what they're saying is in this step is that we created this extended range VLAN. Remember, VTP version 1 and 2 cannot handle the extended range VLANs. Only VTP version 3 can, which we saw right here. So it's able to communicate and manage extended range VLANs. Now, if we come back to ALSWO1, take a look at what we're getting here. VTP protocol user notification checksum mismatch on receipt of equal revision summary on trunk. And so this is the situation that it wanted us to force. It wanted us to force the fact that when a VTP message with an equal revision number but a different MD5 checksum is received, you're going to get an error. And so now we've forced that condition here. So that's what they wanted us to see on step 6. Now, something else to check here. Let's say show VLAN brief. What do we see? Well, take a look. Remember, VTP version 2 is backward compatible, or I'm sorry, version 3 is backward compatible with version 2. So we do pick up 515. However, where is 1500? Exactly. The reason we don't see 1500 is because 1500 is an extended range VLAN, and VTP version 2 does not work with the extended range VLANs. All right, so now we're going to transition to step 7. We're going to change the VLAN status. We're going to be deactivating ports. And so this is what we had looked at earlier when we talk about the difference between the state suspend and the shutdown command. So this is a client. Show VTP status. I'm pretty sure this is a client. Yeah, so this is a client. You can see we have a checksum mismatch on those trunks, and that is indicative of the fact that we are receiving a different checksum across those two trunk ports. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to shut down the guest VLAN 110, and we're going to see what ends up happening. So if I were to say show VLAN brief, here's the guest VLAN 110. So let's go into global config. I'm going to say VLAN 110. And now it says VTP VLAN configuration not allowed when device is in client mode. So we're just going to go ahead, and I'm not sure, I could have sworn that they wanted us to switch this at some point, VTP mode server. So we're going to change it to a server, and I'm just going to simply say shutdown VLAN, or actually, hold on one second here. Let's see, VTP mode client. Let's see if it works from here. So we'll say shutdown VLAN 110. All right, so then we'll say do show VLAN brief. And there we go. So in the previous video, when I went to do this, I tried to go into the VLAN. So you can't do it from the VLAN. So remember, the difference between the shutdown and the state suspend is the state suspend is done on your VTP server when you want that to be propagated to all of the switches in the VTP domain. What I tried to do initially, and that was my mistake, and I apologize. So all I needed to do was type in shutdown VLAN 110 instead of trying to go into the VLAN. And so this proves that when this is a client, which is do show VTP status. So when this is a client, I can shut it down locally, right? I can do it locally, and this works on transparent switches as well. So again, do show VLAN brief. So basically what I've said is on ALS01, any ports that I have that are in VLAN, in VLAN 110 are now shut down. And at layer 2, the ports are shut down. Okay. However, up here, VLAN 110 is not shut down. It is up, or I should say it's active. And so let's go check that out. Let's squeegee the screen here and go back to the command line. So when I say on DLSW01, you can see 110 guest active, but let's run the command again since we've made that change, and it is locally significant. So that shutdown VLAN 110 is a locally significant action. We did it on ALSW01, which is a client switch. Now, if I wanted to reactivate that VLAN, I would say no shutdown VLAN 110, and then do show VLAN brief, and we should see that it's in the active state. So now at layer 2, frames will be passed. All right, so that's the shutdown. Now let's take a look at the state suspend, which I believe we had worked on a little bit earlier, but let's do another one here. Same thing with VLAN 110. So now I'm going to say VLAN 110 state suspend. And we'll say end, write mem, show VLAN brief. And what does it show for VLAN 110? Well, on the server, it shows it's suspended. How about over here on the client? Suspended. So again, the two use cases between shutdown and suspend. Shutdown is when you want to deal with it locally on an individual switch, where you want to shut down the VLAN at layer 2, where all frames for any ports in that VLAN are going to be dropped. State suspend is a global decision where you make it on a VTP server, and then that is propagated to all of the other switches in the VTP domain. So then let's go ahead. The final step here in this lab, we're going to bring that back out of the suspended state, go into global config, VLAN 110, and simply say state active. So we'll end. We'll do a show VLAN brief. And as you can see, 110 is now active. Did the change propagate even down to the VTP version 2 neighbor? And it did. It is now active. So again, I'm going to get a better answer for you guys before Monday on why, and we'll see with the 15 code in class. Again, I'm running 12.255 code here, 12.255 SE10. So we'll see with the 15.2 code and the 15.0 code that we have, whether or not when you go to do the primary, the VTP primary VLAN for VLANs, whether or not you pick up a conflict, and it should show a conflict. So I was surprised that it just simply stripped the primary status. Again, it did keep with the feature that you can only have one primary server. I just expected and anticipated that it was going to come back and say, no, there's a conflict. Somebody else is already the primary server, instead of stripping that primary server status away from the switch. Okay, so do show VTP status. All right, well, this is going to wrap up. Again, I broke it into two halves because it just started to get a lot of material to cover here. So here we go. We've got configuration revision 13 down here. And I'm going to do a supplemental lab right now that follows this guy. It'll be pretty short. And all it's going to do, it's going to show you the danger of VTP, because I'm going to introduce our 2950 here, who has all the same VTP settings, who's been sitting in a closet for 3 years, and now we're going to bring him out, we're going to plug him in, and his revision number is 26. And show VLAN brief, what does he have? We'll take a look at that. He's got quite a few VLANs here, right? So let's see what happens when you take a switch that maybe you were using 6 months ago, a year ago, and you rip it off the shelf to put it into place, and you don't clear the configuration from a VTP perspective. What happens when this gets plugged in? And we're going to see that ALSW1 is going to be in all kinds of trouble because he has a lower configuration revision number. And do show VLAN brief. Those are all going to go away. All right. Well, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you Monday night.